Hi everybody, my name is Margot and me and Kylie did our contrastive analysis project on Tagalog. Looking at the Hi everybody, my name is Margot and me and Kylie did our contrastive analysis project on Tagalog. Looking at the history, Tagalog is the native language of the Philippines and was spoken as the primary language prior to American and Spanish conquistors entering the Philippines. Due to its prevalence, it was the official language from 1937 until 1987. As Spaniards and Americans colonized, Filipino was developed. Filipino and Tagalog are extremely similar. In fact, Filipino was derived from Tagalog. The primary difference between the two is the incorporation of words from other languages, such as Spanish, English, and Chinese. The two have very similar grammatical structures and share the majority of lexical items. Despite this, Tagalog remains prevalent and approximately 64 million people across the world speak it. It is the primary language of Luzon as well as Manila, which is the capital of the Philippines. Tagalog was written in the Baybayin script until the 17th century. Once the Spaniards entered the Philippines, they made the switch to the Roman alphabet. Baybayin script is now used for decorative purposes, and that's demonstrated in the image. The phrases on the slides that I have written in the Baybayin alphabet as well as the Roman alphabet says, "How are you?" The primary dialect is Filipino. Filipino and Tagalog are essentially the same, but Filipino includes words from other languages. Therefore, the grammar structure, the pronouns, the verbal affixes are the same between these two languages. Filipino is essentially the modernized version of Tagalog. Another important dialect is Batangas. It's one of the most widespread dialects. It has a strong accent and grammar that's really closely related to Old Tagalog. As we can see on the map, Batangas is shown in red, and we can also see all of the other dialects that are and where they are most widely spoken through the Philippines. All of these dialects are very similar to one another and can be used interchangeably. Moving into the language system, Tagalog is a non-tonal language, meaning it's a language where the tone of your voice does not impact the meaning of the words. There's 5 vowels, 16 consonants, and we can see them to the right. There's 6 diphthongs, and Tagalog is a highly phonetic language, meaning that the words are spelled as they sound. The stress tends to be on the last 2 syllables, however, this is not a definite rule. And a really important aspect of the language system is the glottal stop, which is the sound made by rapidly closing and releasing the vocal cords while breathing out. So it's essentially a pause. The glottal stop is an important factor in English, however, it does not make a difference to the meaning of the words. In Tagalog, however, it is extremely significant as it can change the meaning of words. In Tagalog phonology, there's 21 segmental phonemes. Tagalog is a syllably timed language, meaning that all syllables are given equal time to pronounce. And CVC and CV are the most common syllable structures, meaning CVC meaning consonant vowel consonant and CV just meaning consonant vowel patterns. Words that end in vowels may end in the H phoneme or a glottal stop but are not represented in writing. We can see here with the word bata, when bata ends with a glottal stop, it means child, versus bata, when it ends with the phoneme H, it means bathrobe. We definitely have this similar in English, but it's important to recognize the difference that these two phonemes make that are often, or that are not in writing. Voiceless stops are not aspirated when they're at the start of a stressed syllable. So the P, the K, and the T phoneme are not aspirated, which is, again, different. And voiceless and voice stops are typically unreleased in the final position. Another important aspect of Tagalog phonology is the phoneme R, and it's particularly challenging for English learners because in Tagalog, as well as in many other languages that we can see, the phoneme R has a rolling R sound where you flick your tongue against the roof of your mouth. So, for example, rado, as opposed to like radio, as we would say in English, or like rocket ship. So in English, the phoneme R is not a rolling sound. It's shorter and your tongue does not touch the roof of your mouth. Therefore, there is none of that rolling sound or like the flick of your tongue. This can be exceptionally challenging for English language learners. Moving on to vowels, vowels are long or short depending on their location in a phrase. They're also long or short based upon the context of the situation, so it's really important that you are aware of the conversation that's occurring in order for you to understand a long or short vowel. And these long or short vowels can completely change the meaning of the words, which is another reason why we need to be very conscious of it. So short vowels, unstressed syllables have short vowels. Vowels are shortest when they immediately follow a glottal stop. So buhai means alive. To really emphasize the short vowel, we can say buhai as opposed to bahai, which is saying life. So we can see how the difference between a short vowel, it changes the meaning to alive versus a long vowel, meaning life. So they're similar, but it definitely changes the meaning. Mag-aaral is another example of a long vowel sound, as we see with the double A vowels. Magaral is the short vowel version, which means a student. So again, we can kind of see how the short vowel changes a student versus a long vowel, meaning will study. They both have a similar meaning, however, it is different. Looking at the syntax of tag-along, in English we have the subject of our sentence, while in tag-along there's a focus or point of departure, POD. The POD is the starting point to a basic sentence. It's what you need to begin with. So it's basically what the speaker or writer is thinking about before they begin the sentence. Rather than a subject that can be defined by the reader or the listener, the POD is chosen by the speaker based upon the things that they want the reader to or the listener to know, such as what is in the surroundings, shared knowledge, something that has been previously mentioned or implied. So it's much more difficult to find a POD as opposed to the subject because it's very it's based upon who's doing the talking in it. And the POD can be a person, an object, a place, an idea. So within these two sentences that I have in both tag-along and English, we have the top one that's saying John is Mary's cousin, where John is the POD, as opposed to the second sentence that says Mary is John's cousin. So while these both are saying the same things, the speaker wanted to emphasize a different person in each of them, therefore the POD is different. To take a closer look at the difference between a tag-along POD and an English subject, the POD generally comes after the action while the subject comes before. So an example of this in English is Margot went on a run. I, Margot, the subject of the sentence, I'm stated before I go on the run. The subject is usually the one doing the action, and the POD can be doing the action, it can be the object or the result of the action. So looking back at my example, Margot is doing the action. She is going on the run. A POD can be definite, the cat, or generic, such as cats in general, while subjects are generally definite. If the object of an action is definite, the object is the POD. In English, the object of the action does not have to be the subject. So I have an example of that to the right. The top sentence translates to Mary ate ice cream, while the bottom sentence translates to Mary ate the ice cream. In the top sentence, Mary ate ice cream is indefinite, therefore Mary is the POD. In the bottom sentence, the ice cream is definite because of the term the. It makes ice cream definite. Because ice cream is definite, that means that it has to be the POD because it is the object of the action and it is definite. Figures of speech are an aspect of semantics, and figures of speech are oftentimes very challenging to understand and even make no sense when directly translated. In order to understand them, you not only have to have a grasp on language, but on the culture of itself, and this tends to be the last thing that English language learners develop. Magabat ang kamay translates to someone who is lazy. But in Tagalog, this figure of speech says heavy-handed. In English, this may mean someone who is aggressive and not gentle. So we can see how with this figure of speech that the direct translation isn't exactly what the speech is implying. Another aspect of semantics is prepositional phrases. In Tagalog, the main goal is to indicate location or direction. In textbooks, these words are generally called location markers. and the terms sa or nasa are used as indicators. Nasa mesa ang pakain means the food is on the table. Sa bahay ni Pina ang salo means the party is at Pina's place. In English, prepositional phrases show where something is when it happened, so it could be before, on top of, below, all of those kinds of words, while in Tagalog, the prepositional phrases really focus on location. Affixes play a large role in Tagalog morphology. Affixes work to change a noun into an adjective. They can show the tense of a verb. They can help show the POD. They can really do a wide variety of things. They are seen as prefixes, suffixes, and infixes. Most commonly, they're seen as infixes and prefixes. Infixes are after the initial consonant in a word, and they work to change the tense of the word. In the Tagalog word sulat, when we add the prefix it changes to sumalat, which changes right to right. When we use the prefix or the infix in, it changes sulat to sinulat, which changes it from right to written. There's a wide variety of prefixes in Tagalog, however, I chose to highlight these three. So the prefix ma is added to a noun and it works to make it an adjective. So in the word ganda, which means beauty, when we add the prefix ma, we have maganda, and it changes beauty into beautiful. Now with the next two prefixes, we can see how prefixes change the meaning based on the word and on the part of speech. So when the prefix pa, when it's added to a noun, it's asking someone for a favor. So for example, with the word sakai, which means right, when you add the prefix pa, we have pa sakai, which is changing ride to can I have a ride. When pa is added to a verb, it indicates that an action is about to occur. So with the word punta, which means go, when we add the prefix pa, we have pa punta, which means just about to go. And then we have two suffixes, one being ein. So when we have kain, which means eat, and we add the suffix an, we have kayan, which means eat in a specific place. We can also see this suffix being used with the word palay, which means rice, and then we add the suffix an, we have palayan, which means rice field. So we can see how that's specifically showing the location. In the other suffix in, it's referring to a specific thing. So here in the example, we have kain again, and then we add the suffix in, we have kainin, which means eat that. So the suffix in changes from eat as a general statement to eat that one specific thing. The Filipino culture puts an emphasis on showing respect from one another, therefore the Tagalog language uses language to do this. Respect for your elders is something that's really important, and a large aspect of that is to not refer to elders by their first name. An example of this is when a child is referring to their stepmom, they would call them Mama Julie, rather than just Julie, as that would be disrespectful. Use of polite words is also something that's really, really important. So the casual way of saying yes is the phrase oo, but when speaking to a respected person, such as an elder, one would use po or opo, which also means yes. These are phrases that you generally wouldn't use with a friend or a peer. However, when referring or talking to a well-respected person or an elder, these are phrases that you would want to use. Talking a little bit more about phrases, in the United States, English speakers tend to be pretty sensitive about sensitive topics, and this is not really the case in the Philippines. So Filipinos in Tagalog may ask you things such as, do you have a boyfriend? Have you gained weight? And these phrases are not meant to be invasive or hurtful. Rather, it's just part of the cultural aspect. So that's definitely something to take into consideration when you have new children in your classroom that are learning and interacting with one another.
So, as for some potential difficulties that English learner Tagalog speakers may face, some of these difficulties may include word order, the ER or EST suffix, overmarking, not including the N. They may have some trouble with 9 English consonants that are not in the Tagalog language. There are also differences in places of articulation in the Tagalog language versus English. Students may also have some trouble with auxiliary and linking verbs because Tagalog doesn't have these. And they also might have trouble with pronouns since pronouns don't indicate gender in the Tagalog language. Here are some Filipino cultural norms and rules of etiquette. So, Filipinos are typically not very demanding of privacy, space, or possessions. This is because Filipinos typically live with a lot of their relatives and family members under one roof, so things like privacy, space, or possessions are all very shared and communal between their family members. Filipinos are typically very relaxed when it comes to punctuality, so it can be very common for Filipinos to show up 1 to 2 hours late to something, except for business meetings or doctor's appointments. Filipinos take those very seriously and are very prompt to those. Respect is very important in the Filipino culture, especially towards older generations. And when it comes to gift giving, Filipinos typically say thank you and set the gift aside to open later. And it is considered offensive to ask questions about income or standard of living, but it is common for Filipinos to ask about age, level of education, or work so they know how to address you. So, in Tagalog or Filipino culture, here are some of their greeting norms. When greeting strangers, Filipinos typically shake hands and smile for men, and when women are greeting each other, they smile and wave. For greeting close friends and family, men typically shake hands and pat each other on the back, and women will hug and kiss. A typical greeting will go something like "Kamusta kayo," which means "How are you?" When someone is older than you but in the same generation, you would refer to the male as kuya and a female as ate. Since it is common So, as for Filipino communication style, Filipinos tend to speak with very indirect communication and in a passive voice to avoid haya, which means shame or embarrassment in Tagalog. Filipinos tend to express their ideas very diplomatically and with humility. This is so they make sure everyone is heard, they're very easygoing, and they don't want to be disrespectful or offensive to anyone. So that's why they say their ideas and thoughts and opinions very diplomatically and in a very easygoing manner. They are very big on no interruption, and Filipinos typically pay very close attention to tone of voice and body language, such as posture or gestures. It is very common for Filipinos to check for clarification many times, especially because of the indirect passive communication style. Filipinos tend to be overly polite and agreeable, and they also don't really give negative responses or a solid, straightforward no. Filipinos tend to say po to demonstrate respect to elders or someone of high status, or salamat po, which translates to thank you po. Since it is common for Filipinos' communication style to be very indirect and passive, it is important to be able to pick up on your Filipino students' nonverbal behavior and pay close attention to what they're not saying, since they probably aren't going to be as direct with their words. So, some nonverbal behavior in Filipino culture is that when relatives or friends of the same gender walk hand in hand or arm in arm, that is typically a sign of affection or shyness. Laughter is typically to cover up embarrassment or relieve some awkward tension. To point to something, Filipinos will typically pucker their lips and point their mouth in the direction they're trying to point in. When someone in Filipino culture wants someone's attention, they'll typically say psst, and to beckon someone, they will have their hand facing down and wave fingers towards themselves. So, for teachers or future teachers, here are some tips for interacting with your Filipino students. It is very important to be understanding and to teach classroom norms and boundaries regarding personal space and possessions. It is also very important to show interest in your student's family, so that could be asking questions, remembering specific details about your student's family. This is especially important for your Filipino students because family is one of the most important values of the Filipino culture. It is also important to show a lot of warmth and kindness. Filipinos are known to be very joyful people, so when you're greeting them, be very smiley and happy and joyful as well. Look for hints of hesitation or signs of discomfort. Pay attention to what your student doesn't say. As I mentioned before, the Filipino communication style is very indirect and passive, so your students aren't going to be very expressive with their words. So you have to pay attention to what they're not saying by focusing in on their body language and just their tones of voice and different signs of hesitation. Be understanding and don't be offended if a student calls out to you by saying psst or by signaling you over with their hand. This could also be another conversation to just set some classroom norms and boundaries in place. Questions such as, do you have a boyfriend or have you gained weight, can be common in Filipino culture. They're not meant to be rude or invasive at all, but you can guide these students towards classroom norms and boundaries if any students say anything like this. And if a student asks about your age, don't be offended. It is so they can figure out how to address you. And here are some tips for interacting with Filipino parents. Since Filipinos tend to be relaxed with punctuality, you may have to ensure that Filipino parents know the importance of their child being on time to school. Do not talk to Filipino parents in oversimplified English. This may come across as being patronizing towards them, and you want to be as respectful as possible. Many Filipinos actually speak English, so it would be nice to acknowledge their education and English proficiency. Again, it is very important to show interest in their family. Like I said before, family is one of the most important parts of Filipino culture. Meetings tend to take longer with Filipinos. That's definitely very important to keep in mind as a teacher who is going to be meeting with parents, since they like to check in on how everyone feels about something, and since they aren't as direct, pay attention to what they aren't saying and look for signs of discomfort, and obviously be as respectful as possible during parent meetings. Also, as I mentioned before, Filipinos are known to be very joyful people, so smile when you are greeting those Filipino parents and be very friendly. And it is important to stay after a meeting and engage in social conversation. So make sure you save some time for that after your parent meeting.